Liverpool, England, a seaport city on the River Mersey. People say it's a tough, grimy city, a place you don't want to visit. But people who say that probably haven't been to Liverpool, because the city and its people are easy to love. And if you're a Beatle fan, Liverpool is Mecca.
What Shakespeare did for Stratford-upon-Avon, the Beatles have done for Liverpool.
Thousands of Beatle fans come here every year on pilgrimages to see where it all began.
It's exciting to think of where the Beatles were and kind of see what their life was like.
Yeah, we lucked out coming into town just at the right time.
So this is Mathew Street.
Yeah, you can see the sign up there. Only once.
David Jones is a professional Beatle guide. His Cavern City tours takes the faithful to famous Beatle places like Mathew Street, where Beatlemania first broke out in a one-time underground fruit warehouse, the Cavern Club.
It was dirty. It was dark. It smelled.
But none of that mattered when the Beatles were on. The kids and the Beatles just went crazy.
Well, everybody knew they were going to make it. You know, they just had this presence on stage and everything that, you know, was just electric, and they used to just take over.
As any Beatle fan can probably tell you, the original Cavern Club was demolished back in 1973, but in '84 it was rebuilt brick by brick in the same place, using the same bricks.
Yeah, looks fine. It's very authentic.
I don't want to make a million, Charlie. I just want to make a few extra potatoes.
People here are proud of the boys, but they don't worship them, because in Liverpool, the Beatles are just like everyone else.
There's a famous sort of statement that says you've got to be a comedian to live here. And as comedians, the Beatles didn't stand out in this city, they did outside.
John Lennon and Paul McCartney met as teenagers here at the Woolton Church Fete in 1957. Paul came to hear John's band, the Quarrymen.
Knew John Lennon very well.
What kind of a lad was he?
Little devil.
John Lennon grew up in this house at 251 Menlove Avenue. Paul McCartney lived a few miles away at 20 Forthland Road. Paul's friend, George Harrison, lived at 12 Arnold Grove. Old neighbors still live there.
Quite a nice, very quiet.
Ringo Starr lived at 10 Admiral Grove. Margaret Gross, who lives there now, says Ringo still visits.
He comes now and again, you know, when he comes to Liverpool.
In their hearts, the Beatles never really left Liverpool, and real places there inspired them even after they moved to London. John's Strawberry Fields was and is a Salvation Army children's home.
John lived just around the corner from here with his Aunt Mimi, and it was like a huge adventure playground for him.
Paul's Penny Lane hasn't changed much. The barber shop is unisex now, but we found the shelter in the middle of the roundabout, there beneath the blue suburban skies. The bank is still there, and the fireman still rushes in.
At first, though, I don't think they're going to get anywhere, you know. They're only another group.
John's Uncle Charlie.
And then I began to realise, well, there's something in it. You know, which there was, and good luck to them, they made it. Mind you, I never did.
He's a Lennon, all right. It's easy for a first-time visitor to feel lost in London. The city is so huge, so bustling, and so sophisticated that it can overwhelm you. But if London was overwhelming to the four boys who arrived here from Liverpool in 1962, it didn't show.
For our last number, I'd like to ask your help. The people in the cheaper seats, clap your hands. And the rest of you, if you just rattle your jewelry.
Within a year, they had overwhelmed London, and this proper city had succumbed to Beatlemania. The Beatles were almost prisoners of their fame. They had to be protected from their own fans wherever they went. To John and Cynthia Lennon, a young couple who'd been married in Liverpool, it was like a dream.
It was a dream. Yes, it still is to a certain extent. I still look back on it and think it was wonderful, exciting, but I still think, did it really happen sometimes?
We were a little clique of exiles in London, you know, all clinging together for support.
Tony Barrow was the Beatles' first press agent, and he had the ultimate product to sell.
Even at that early stage, the Beatles themselves overtook their own hype, their own promotion, call it what you will.
If you want to walk in the Beatles' footsteps in London, then the place to start is Abbey Road. The Beatles immortalized this crosswalk on the cover of their Abbey Road album. It's just outside EMI's Abbey Road Studios. Just look for the fans.
they seem to take it as a bit of a shrine, I suppose, you know, with the Beatles and all that.
This is it.
This is Studio 2.
All the Beatles did in Abbey Road Studio 2 was reinvent rock and roll and revolutionize recording.
They made 191 of their 210 songs in this particular studio sitting in now. This was their home base.
And you can almost hear the echoes of all the great songs they recorded in this room. But their 1962 audition at Abbey Road was less than promising.
It was a bit tatty in some ways, really, because their equipment was pretty ropey, and it was very much of a commercial test. And at the end of the day, you would never believe that they were going to be superstars of the future.
The Beatles invented sounds in Studio 2 which Abbey Road can create at the touch of a button in its new studios, and there's still so much interest in what the Beatles did here that EMI has published a book documenting every recording session. For me, the biggest thrill was playing one of the Steinways in Studio 2, the same piano we heard on so many Beatle records. Another Beatles shrine is Apple, the Beatles' old headquarters at 3 Savile Row.
In them days, it used to be pretty blocked all the way through. Nobody ever got through, and I wanted to know the reason why.
The British Building Society, which occupies the building now, doesn't know what to do with all the tourists.
Is this 3 Savile Row? And we say yes. Can we come in? And we say no.
This is the famous rooftop at Apple. It was here that the Beatles did their last live public performance 20 years ago this week on a cold day just like this one, and they almost caused a riot in London's West End.
By then, the Beatles were too big to play live anywhere, even their own rooftop.
Arrived in America and had no idea, no conception of what the response would be.
Yet just 5 short years before, the Beatles were very frightened about coming to America. The slow drums of John F. Kennedy's funeral procession still echoed through a mourning America in early 1964. The assassin's bullets seemed to kill off the hopes and dreams of America's young people as well as a popular president. Then suddenly the air was filled with music unlike anything we'd ever heard before. It was full of joy, and it was just what America needed. At first, the only pictures we had were record jackets like these. Though the Beatles had conquered England, they were very much worried about whether their act would go over in America.
25 years ago, when the Beatles first went to America, they were frightened. I mean, it was all very well having success here in Liverpool first, then in England, but it was quite another thing going to America.
John Lennon's then-wife Cynthia says the boys were nervous about coming to Elvis Presley's home turf.
Oh yes, is that hard to believe? I suppose it is hard to believe. Yes, we were children. Again, if you think about how old we were at the time, it was a tremendous adventure. It was the unknown.
The Beatles didn't know it, but they'd conquered America before they ever got here. And when they got off the plane at New York's Kennedy Airport, thousands of screaming teenagers were waiting.
I mean, it's mind-boggling.
At their first press conference, they completely disarmed and charmed everyone with their accents and cheeky humor.
Who came up with the name Beatles, and what does it really mean?
John thought of the name Beatles, and he'll tell you about it now. It means Beatles, doesn't it? You know, that's just a name. You know, like shoe. It means shoe.
The shoes. You see, we could have been called the Shoes for all you know.
I don't think anyone who was watching that night will ever forget the Beatles' first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show.
And there they were, live in millions of American living rooms, as we all watched in utter fascination that Sunday night. Most of our parents were horrified, but teenagers loved them. Was it their music, their hair?
Their hair really fascinated. I don't know what it was. I mean, maybe part of it was because, you know, my parents stood there watching the TV saying, "Oh, God, is that awful? Look at their hair. It's terrible. Why don't they get haircuts?"
Their hair seems so tame today, but in 1964 it was radical and it scared the grown-ups.
Absolutely scared the hell out of our parents. I mean, my parents thought there was nothing worse except maybe Elvis.
Now there were 4 Elvises to contend with, and every teenage girl had her favorite.
You know, I was kind of dreamily watching Paul McCartney, my favorite, you know, wishing that I'd be the girl that he would fall in love with someday.
When they got to John, it was John. Sorry, girls.
He's married.
After that TV show, guys like me got guitars and grew their hair. Guys like Gary Shrum began collecting Beatle records and memorabilia.
Growing up with it like that, it's just part of your life that you can't get rid of.
David Peck wasn't even born when the Beatles came to America, yet he's a Beatles archivist and a super fan.
And I've always been in the Beatles since I was a little kid. It was just something that was with me.
Helene Kazar, who teaches a course on the 60s at UCSD, says there's a whole new generation of Beatle fans now.
I think kids today are both becoming very interested in the 60s because it's the time of their parents.
In the 60s, the Beatles led, the rest of us followed. They became the voice of a generation.
It goes on forever, the story and the legend and the legacy.
And it's hard to imagine what our lives would have been like without them.